Thank you everybody for joining today into our webinar. It's the second part of our series on data integrity in GCP. The first part we did, and we did a survey what you're interested in most for the second time, and yeah, we listened to you, and the answer was case studies. So today we will present some case studies, and I'm really happy to have our two speakers here today. I will rather serve as a moderator today, and our speakers are Milena Georgieva is with us at GxP-CC since summer, and is working as a consultant for data integrity and for GCP topics, and has 2.5 years experience in the GCP area. And the second speaker is Talea Papadopoulou, who is our mastermind in the GCP topic, I would say here, is a consultant for data integrity and has a broad experience about GCP and every related topics. And yeah, I'm really happy to have you here today. We will give you some case studies about these topics, about vendor management and qualification, and we'll have a case study on audit trail. Clinical trial oversight will be a hot topic, I think, the access management, and finally, security controls. And with that, I hand over the word to Milena.
Yes, thank you, Ulrich. Thank you, Talia. Thank you for having me and for giving me this opportunity to talk with you on data integrity part 2 in GCP scope. So I will start with vendor management and qualification, and we decide to open this presentation because it's a very hot topic lately, especially because pharma companies are outsourcing activities, a lot of activities to third-party vendors and to CROs, just because they don't have enough expertise in-house, or they just want to focus on research and development department in their company. That's why we will start with why it's important to have a qualified vendor and how lack of CRO oversight can influence the trial. So the first case study that we're having is a normal clinical trial. We're having a pharma company that is having a multi-center bioequivalence study, and they're having a clinical trials activities. So they assign the clinical trials activities to a third-party vendor or a CRO in this case. However, the CRO that they assigned the activities has experience, but has only single site bioequivalence experience. So the question would be, what can happen if the contracted CRO is not qualified? In this case, it's not that it's completely not qualified, but let's say that it does not have the expertise that the pharma company would want and would expect. So when the inspectors went on site, they found out that the monitoring and the audit forms that were used in the study, they were the same as for the single site studies, which actually did not reflect the conduct of this study, which is a multi-center study. And the second thing they found out is that the sponsor failed to ensure that the CRO had appropriate system and procedure to handle multi-center studies. So now the question would be, which responsibility is this? Is it the CRO? Is it the sponsor? And according ICH E6, which is a guideline on good clinical practices, which is fully adopted by EMA, under point 5.2.1, it says that, of course, sponsor can transfer sponsor trial-related duties and function to a CRO, but the ultimate responsibility for the quality and the integrity of the trial data always resides with the sponsor. So this leads us to think that sponsor oversight is a very important thing when we are outsourcing activities to a third party. And also under point 5.2.2, it says that all the trial-related duties and functions that are transferred and assumed by the CRO, they should be specified in writing. So this is, as I said, it's fully adopted by EMA, so it's Europe. Of course, FDA and CRF, they have different regulations. Basically, sponsor oversight can be, if it's in written, can be completely outsourced to the CRO, the responsibility over the trial. But yes, in this case, we should keep in mind that the sponsor is the main responsible for the quality of the and the integrity of the trial. And with this, I will go to the second case study, which is what happened if we have a lack of sponsor oversight. So it's again a clinical trial and a pharma company that has assigned the clinical trial activities to a CRO. In this case, it's not specified what kind of CRO, if it was qualified or no. However, when inspectors went on site, they found out that first there was lack of oversight of TMF, the trial master file, which normally is held by the CRO. However, the sponsor is responsible to ensure that the TMF is up to date and it's complete at any point of the trial. There was inadequate documentation to demonstrate the review of protocol deviations that occurred in the trials. Also, the inspectors found out that there was an inadequate documentation to demonstrate when monitoring visit reports that were created by the CRO were reviewed by whom and the outcome of this review. And they also found out that co-monitoring visits were not performed in accordance with the monitoring oversight plan. So overall, the findings were that there was no evidence to demonstrate the sponsor oversight activities as specified in the oversight plans. And why is this a problem? Well, if we check ICH again, E6 on good clinical practices, under point 5.2.2, it says that the sponsor should ensure oversight of any trial-related duties and functions that are whether carried out by the sponsor themselves or if these functions are subcontracted to another party, in this case to CRO. Also, I wanted to add here the EMA guideline on TMF content management and archiving, which says that yes, the duties can be outsourced to the CRO. However, the sponsor remains responsible for trial and will need to maintain oversight over the TMF to ensure that it's complete and up to date. So the take-home message from the first types of case studies would be that sponsor oversight is a key component to ensure that rights, well-being, and safety of the trial participants is kept. Also is the key component to ensure that reliability of the study results and also that the trial is conducted according all the regulatory expectations. Oversight efforts should be, of course, focused on the areas which has highest risk for generating errors, and it is better if the sponsor oversight approach is designed to proactively address issues instead of to be reactive to them once they happen. So now the question is how we can achieve this, how we can improve oversight, sponsor oversight. And there are a few ways. What is very important is to have a proper training and communication because they're essential to ensure that the protocol is understood. And also it's the only way how to identify and to resolve important systemic issues with the study design and with the conduct of the study. Also, the sponsor should have technical knowledge or the access to technical knowledge to be able to make appropriate decisions regarding their oversight activities and conduct of the study. There are also a few other ways how sponsor oversight can be improved. And basically what is very important for sponsor to keep in mind is when there is a clinical study that started already, it's better if the sponsors sit down with the CRO, they communicate what are the expectations from the CRO. They can also perform co-monitoring visits with the CRO, or they can review, for example, the monitoring reports that are written by the CRO, basically to get an idea how the CRO is working, what are the trends and the issues that they're confronted with, are they paying attention to details? So these are a few of the ways how sponsor oversight can be kept in study and also improved. And with this, I would like to give it to Talia. She will continue with the next topic.
Thank you, Milena. So the next topic for today is around audit trails, a very key topic and hot topic on data integrity, where a lot of failures are reported, not only in GCP, but in general in GMP as well, and compliance. And we're going to focus again on failures that have to do with sponsor oversight. So the first example has to do with the documentation of data in a neurology trial, which was double-blinded, randomized, and placebo-controlled, where the primary efficacy endpoint, so the main measurement of the trial, was had to be by protocol reported by the clinicians on a tablet which was provided for the trial. The problem there was that according to the protocol, there should have been a direct entry of the participant function during the patient visits at the clinical site. However, when the inspectors reviewed the audit trail within the device during an inspection, they found that the data was being entered on an average 2.5 to 3.5 hours after the visit, after the assessment had taken place at the clinic. And this was, and worse than that, it was performed based on the memory of the investigator. Of course, this is unacceptable, and it's against the ALCOA principles, where according to which there should be contemporaneous recording of data. And how are the agencies actually ensuring that this should not happen, or basically showing their expectations that this should not be happening? First of all, within the FDA 21 CFR Part 3212, it is written that sponsors are responsible for selecting qualified investigators, and they are responsible themselves for ensuring that there is proper monitoring of investigations, and that they are conducted in accordance with the investigational plan. So in this case, there should be a monitoring plan in place also for the oversight of the clinics, ensuring that the data entry was contemporaneous according to what the protocol expected. On the other hand, according to the SEH GCP from EMA, one of the duties of monitoring by the sponsor is to ensure that reported clinical trial data are accurate, of reporting of the clinical trial data is accurate, complete, and verifiable from source documents, which ensures that the trial compliance is kept. On the other hand, the draft EMA guideline on computerized systems, which we expect to be finalized by the end of the year, states that there should be data review in place, so that to avoid missing data during the trial, and making sure that the sponsor knows when data is entered at unexpected or inconsistent hours and dates. So this is a measure that should be implemented so that it is detected on time whether additional training of investigators or investigator staff is needed, or also from participants. At last but not least, what is important is that a good audit trail review plan should be in place, so that these inconsistencies and data input errors should be spotted on time, so that the corrective measures can be taken. Yes, so our take-home message here is that there should be a regular audit trail review in place based on critical data to demonstrate effective trial monitoring as it's expected from the regulations. And now we go to the second example, the second case study. It is again on an audit trail related topic. So in this case, both subjects, participants in the study and investigator staff are responsible for entering data within an e-diary, again a tablet, which has emerging data functionality, meaning that if a participant had a device and then switched to another one, the data that they would enter could be merged uh, at any point. So once the data were entered, they were later extracted and used for data analysis. The problem here is that it was not possible to correct data from the source. In this case, when electronic devices are used for capturing data, they are considered as the source. So no paper documents, no documents within the clinic, just the device data is considered as source. What are the problems here? So as I just said, it was not possible to perform data correction. And what was set up to go around this problem was that they had established data correction forms within the trial, which should have been submitted by the investigators to the clinical trial management to correct the data when it was noticed that something was wrong. However, in many cases, it was found during the inspections that these attempts to submit forms were denied, resulting in incorrect data being used for the analysis of the clinical trial data. Furthermore, many of these forms were lacking essential details. They only would reference help desk ticket number, and even worse, they were not available to investigators. They were not given back to them, and they were not available in the TMF, which is a wrongdoing, as it impaired the reconstruction of the trial. So to be more specific, according to ICH GCP, the problem here is that the sponsors failed to ensure reliability of the trial results by identifying critical data, as the critical data here were not possible to be corrected. So the trial ended up with having partially wrong data. Also, there was a failure to identify risks to critical data during data collection. And finally, a failure to maintain essential documents within TMF, as according to the appendix of the ICH GCP, which is adopted by the EMA, documentation corrections of CRF corrections are part of the essential documentation of a trial. Furthermore, there was a failure by the sponsor to adequately manage trial data, which is expected by the ICH GCP. And also, there was a failure to validate the e-diary system in a way to ensure that the data of trial were reliably tracked and also inputted accurately, and the reliability of the data was compromised. The second problem of this setup was the e-diary did not have an audit trail functionality, meaning that nobody could track who would enter the data at any point. And as I mentioned in the beginning, both investigators and patients had the possibility to enter data. So this created a big confusion, because nobody could trace back who had entered data. Of course, here the finding was that there was failure from the sponsor part to establish audit trails which are able to track and record data capture and changes. At the end, the final problem with this setup of the trial was that there was no list of device IDs, so the e-diaries, and as there was the possibility for these devices to be merged, so the data, there was it was possible to merge data that were entered by the same patient from different devices. There was no track record of device assignment, meaning that after merging, it was not possible to see from which device data was recorded at each time. In this case, again, one of the findings again for the sponsor was that they failed to maintain integrity of the data when making changes to computerized systems, so when going from one device to another. The take-home message is that when it comes to cases like this, sponsors should ensure that the systems they use for the trial have come with meaningful audit trail functionality, which can enable effective tracking of data entry and also the possibility of data correction, which can be traced. Also, it is of a great advantage to be knowledgeable of the data flow within the devices and systems in order to assess which are the data integrity issues that can occur and the risks, which will enable later effective data management. And at last but not least, as Milena also mentioned before, here we have again the issue of qualifying properly vendors and select those that offer platforms and tools which can ensure GCP compliance. And with this, I'm transferring back the control to Milena for our next topic.
Thank you, Talia. Very interesting topic. Audit trail. It's one of my favorite, to be honest. But yeah, we can discuss that further. So the next topic that we will focus today is importance of communicating protocol deviations. So I will go directly with the case study. What happened here? There is a skin treatment for a very severe bacterial infection. And what the inspectors found out when they went to sites is that basically 1/3 of the participants, they received the first dose later than they were supposed to receive it. And by late, I mean between 48 hours to 11 days. So this is a bad situation, especially, I mean, in any case, it's a bad thing, but especially in a case where the bacterial infection is severe, which can jeopardize the safety of the patient. However, the inspectors found out that the PD were recorded, which is good from the monitors. However, there was no corrective actions for these PDs. There was no evidence that the delays of the investigator sites were escalated to the senior management in the CRO and also to the sponsor. And basically, the importance of these PDs was not recognized by the sponsor until the very inspection. So the few inspection findings outcome was that sponsor had inadequate monitoring and handling of important protocol deviation. The sponsor failed to bring the site into compliance. Also, the review team, the assessors, they considered that these prolonged delays in the initiation of the therapy, they jeopardized the safety of the trial participants by placing the participants into the increased risk of disease progression. And this disease was very bad because actually some of the patients, they end up hospitalized. So we don't really want any increased risk of progression of such infection. And also the review team, they questioned whether these trial participants at the site had the severity of the infection required for the enrollment if these extended delays were considered as acceptable. So now this leads to the question why these PDs were not escalated. What is the reason basically for handling PDs in general in clinical trials, where there are few issues when it comes to PDs, and defining and communicating of PDs is harder than expected for a few reasons, and some of them are because there is no clear definition on protocol deviation, how they should be tracked, how they should be managed in clinical trials in general, in all the guidelines. What else is missing? Or in this case, it's extra. It's there are too many different nomenclatures and classification schemes which define and classify significance of deviation, what is considered as important deviation and what is considered as non-important. And this is very tricky because each study has a different importance of protocol deviations. So this can lead, yes, to defining and communicating PD harder than normally. And another thing is that basically there is no clear guidance how all kind of deviations should be handled, whether it's protocol, sponsor, CRO, vendor deviations, how they should be documented and reported. So then we can ask the question, but are the regulatory agencies expecting something when it comes to PDs? Well, even though it's a bit tricky how the guidelines are instructing us, they still have a lot of expectations. And I will just put few stuff here. And the first one is from ICH E3, which is the guideline for structure and content of clinical study reports, which basically explains that the important protocol and even process deviation, they should be documented in a way that the inspector, when they review them, they should be able to reconstruct the whole conduct of the study. That's the first expectation. Then another expectation, which is written in ICH E9, which is the statistical principle for clinical trial, also adopted by EMA, it says that there should be a clear sponsor classification scheme for protocol and process deviation. What is considered as important for this study, for this sponsor, and what is considered as non-important. And the third thing, which is mentioned in ICH E6, is that any additional documentation related with protocol deviations, whether it's agreements, discussions, communications between the sponsor and the CRO, all these additional documentation should be captured and should be in place. So with this, I would like to go to the take-home message on protocol deviation, and that is that identifying, tracking, analyzing, and escalating, and also having CAPAs for protocol deviations are of high importance to maintain data quality, data integrity, and trial participant safety, as we saw in this case study that was actually jeopardized. And the second thing is that clear sponsor classification scheme for protocol deviation, as I said, whether it's considered as important or what is considered as important protocol deviation, what is considered as not important, how should we handle protocol deviation, in what amount of time they should be escalated, to whom they should be escalated. This scheme should be in place when we talk about protocol deviation. So yes, very important topic. Also, if we can increase the significance into capturing protocol deviation in other ways, if we just keep all the supporting documentation, as I said, discussions and agreements, and yes, we have to keep in mind that it's very important to have a way how to handle them. And with this, yes, I would like to give it back to Talia. She will continue with the presentation.
Thank you, Milena. So the next two topics are also important in data integrity. The first one is access management, which is in general important in terms of data integrity, but especially in clinical trials, because it comes to also protecting the confidentiality of the subjects and also the blinding in case there is a blinded study. So in the case study we are going to present on this topic, which is a dermatology phase 3 study, so really critical for the outcome of the development of the drug, double-blinded and randomized, meaning that the identity of the participants and and who received or not a treatment should be kept secure. So in this case, again, the primary efficacy assessment was based on data entry that was performed by subjects and investigators during the subject visits, the patient visits at the clinical site, and they were entered on a tablet which was provided by the sponsors of the trial. There was a daily data transfer from the tablet to the study database, after which the data were erased from the source, from the tablet. The problem here is that the investigators had no access to the study database, and of course, since the data was daily deleted from the tablet, they also could not have access to the data after they were transferred. So this led to no possibility for them to review and amend the data, and they were only provided with the final data once the database was locked at the end of the trial via the archival CD that all investigators received. And then, just to make this a bit more interactive, I have a question for you. Do you think that this issue falls under the responsibility of the sponsor? If you could answer in the chat, it would be nice to see your view on that. Whether this is a problem with the vendor, probably that set up the device, or the management of the trial by the CRO or the sponsor. Don't be shy. We're not going to judge the answers. Just gonna wait 10 more seconds to see if you want to express your opinion, whether this is under the responsibility of the sponsor or not.
Can the team members give an opinion?
It's fine. I think they're shy. So the answer is yes. Of course, yes. The sponsors have to show to basically enable the investigators to have access at the source data at all times. So they should also, as expected by ISH GCP, not be the only, not have the sole control over the source data. And they are responsible if they use third-party vendors for the management of their trials or the setup of the devices of the trials, to make sure that the investigators have access to the collected source data at all times, so that they can go and make changes when possible, when needed. This is expected by ISH GCP under records and reports as an addendum. Also, within the EMA draft guideline for computerized systems, it is expected for all data which are collected in EPRO devices, so patient-reported data, that that sponsors are responsible to make available to the investigators the source data in a timely manner, so that the investigators can fulfill their responsibilities for trial oversight. And also, in case there is some kind of response from the investigators that is needed, in case there is a safety problem, that they can also do that, because the safety of the patients is also at risk here if they don't have access to the data. And this brings us to the last case study for today, which has to do with security controls, also important when it comes to data integrity. In this case study, we're going to focus on an interactive voice response system a system which is commonly used in clinical trials, along with web response systems, and there are a lot of failures of data integrity there reported. So in this case, subjects were directly answering to questions via phone on this interactive voice response system, and these data were contributing to the collection of the primary endpoint of the trial. What are the access controls now for the subjects to respond to contribute to this questionnaire? First of all, they were all using a toll-free number, which was specific for the country of origin. They had a uniquely assigned 6-digit patient identifier number that they had to input, and also a 6-digit PIN, which was the patient's birthday. And my new question to you now is whether in this setup there is any questionable design feature that might show, that might actually alert inspectors to question the reliability of the study data. You're very welcome to answer. We're not going to judge. We have an answer that is very correct. There is a problem. The problem is the number 3, the 6-digit PIN, which is the patient's birthday. And why this is the case? Because the PIN number is not encrypted. The sponsor, as of the setup of the study, has access to the PIN number. And if anybody has worked already in clinical trials, the birthday of the patients is one of the is one piece of information which is always appearing, is always an identifier. So the name or something else will not be reported, but the birthday is there. So it can easily be used in a way to identify who the patient was. So this is wrong because the password should have been protected. The new draft EMA guideline on computerized systems and electronic data clinical trials has many paragraphs addressing the issue of security measures and password protection. So when it comes to security, it's very important to maintain data integrity and protection of the rights of the trial participants, computerized systems used in clinical trials, and have proper security processes in place to maintain the blinding of the treatment and allocation and prevent unauthorized access. Also, when it comes to remote authentication and password management, there should be a risk-based sensitivity and confidentiality of the data, and access rights have to be granted cautiously. It should be very much taken care of who takes administrator rights, and there should be a risk-based approach on the type of controls implemented. When the data is very critical and confidential, there should be, of course, in place a two-factor authentication concept. When it comes to password confidentiality, of course, this should be kept confidential, no sharing, because this is an obvious violation of data integrity. And when passwords are shared, even if accounts are properly set up, then this cannot be, the access management concept is not to be trusted anymore. And at last but not least, the passwords of trial participants should be only known to the trial participants. So, of course, when somebody gets access to a system, there is an automatic initial password, but this should be always replaced at the first login. And participants should not record in these systems and should be trained not to do that. Their name, address, security number, or any other piece of information that could identify them. And with this, we are at the end of our case studies for today. So the take-home messages are that as a sponsor, when conducting and setting up a clinical trial, it is good practice to establish audit trails and effective audit trail reviews based on data criticality. Use qualified vendors and, of course, specify who is responsible for which action within contracts, which is especially important when it comes to the FDA, because there the whole responsibility of a part of a trial can be transferred to a vendor if this is specified. For EMA, as Milena said, it's very different because always, no matter what is written, the responsibility lies with the sponsor. Of course, a sponsor should ensure that the systems and documentation in the trial always follow the ALCOA Plus principles, and it's good practice to be aware of data flows between systems and validate the data transfers within systems. And at last but not least, establish secure systems and devices and validate or qualify them. And with that, I give the control back to Ulrich.
Yes, thank you very much for this interesting talk, Milena and Talia. We will just start into the Q&A in a moment. We are very happy to while you're thinking, to present you our services we have. We're happy to help you in the quality management in general and data integrity in the GCP area. Like Talia mentioned, data integrity is a very hot topic at the moment. We will see the new EMA, Data Integrity and Computerized Systems Guideline, which will bring in some new requirements. We can support with quality management, like, for example, auditing, third-party management, but also SOP writing, and are happy to also share our knowledge, as we do here, but also in specified trainings, whichever is required by you. So now I'm happy that we have some questions. So first of all, we have the question that we have. Sorry, I have to publish this one. Is there a clear requirement or a statement regarding CSV in GCP? There were some arguments inside the team of the questioner that there wasn't in past, and now the expectation changes, and the CSV has same value as in GMP. So I had some time during the talk, of course, because I wasn't talking so much. So I also searched to the exact parts of the guidelines. So first of all, one important answer to this is the EMA guideline, which I will share. I will try to share the screen here. I didn't do that before, but I think it shouldn't be a problem. Yeah. So we got the draft guideline on computerized systems and electronic data in clinical trials, and it clearly speaks about validation of systems. All computerized systems used within a clinical trial should be subject to a process that confirms that the requirements of a computer system is consistently fulfilled and the system is fit for its purpose. So that's the validation definition, very similar to the PICS guideline, for example, from the GMP area, defining computerized system validation. Then we can read here a bit more about the documentation. So this is also part of the validation, about the requirements during the operational phase, the SOPs, maybe the administration of the system. This should be clarified. We can also find a very short clause on it in the ICHE 6. So when using electronic trial data handling or trial data systems, the sponsor should ensure and document that the electronic data processing conforms to the requirements and is consistent in consistent performance, which means validation. So I think there are very clear requirements that the system has to be validated. I didn't search this out now, but FDA's Part 11 also speaks, because it's evoked by the other guidelines as predicate rules. It also says that the system has to be validated. So I think this is relatively clear. One point I want to
add something to this, Ulrich?
Yeah.
So I was recently attending this year a joint web conference by the MHRA and the FDA, and they both also, it was Health Canada, which as a regulatory agency participating, and they all agreed when it comes to validation of clinical systems that not only they need to be validated and there should be proof of that and a risk-based approach, but also that this should also be carried out for each particular trial. So for instance, if a sponsor uses the same vendor for a CRF, for a clinical system where the data are recorded in a trial, for each new study, this should be revalidated. And if not, there should be a documentation of why this was not done. So it should be basically shown that all cases that where data is inputted is validated, that is tested, that everything is inputted correctly as the trial is expected to be recorded, as the data of the trial is expected to be recorded. Yes, I think this is also included within the GAM good practice guide for clinical systems. So this information can be also confirmed there.
Yes, and one point I would like to add is that validation always means to choose a risk-based approach. And with that, I mean really a risk-based approach. So what can go wrong if the system fails? That should be the central question. For example, a data flow map could help in order to understand what are the risks which occur concerning the data, but also patient risks should be considered. Now, in the GCP area, sometimes there's a very direct connection to the patient, to the patient's life. So, for example, if something is polluted, there's a very direct impact on the patient's life. So from this standpoint, some systems might, and that's also true for GMP, that's not only for GCP, there might be systems which need a much smaller rigor in terms of validation. But this principle is truth for both areas, for GMP as well as GCP. So you cannot say per se, here you have to do a huge validation and here a smaller one. Finally, there is a new GAM5 edition 2, which also takes into account a lot about this risk-based approach and talks a lot about critical thinking, which goes into the same direction. So what are really the risks? Not to do only validation as a compliance task with huge documentation loads, but to make a meaningful testing, meaningful validation, and to have the rules around the system so that everything is under control. I hope this answers the question. So yes, there are rules, and please keep the risk-based approach in mind in everything what you're doing. There's one last add-on to this question, if I see it right. Yeah, I have to click publish so that everybody sees it. Do the FDA and EMA have the same requirements? It's not exactly the same. I would take as a company which serves both markets the industry guidelines, like the GAM5, the new edition, for example, also the good practice guides around GCP and other guidelines, so that the expectations are not contrary, if you want to say it like this. Yeah. Then one last additional question. Please feel free to still ask.
Ulrich, there is also another question. So the question is, since many activities are outsourced, do the requirements then have to be checked by audit or do further activities which need to be carried out by the company? So the requirements, I'm not sure what the reference is for, but like the expectations, I guess, for GCP compliance.
So I would say to answer this, to try to give this question an answer is yes, it has to be checked by audit. So if you really outsource the activity, let's say, for example, audit trail review, you outsource the audit trail review to a third party, and then you outsource the process. So you have to ensure in the audit that the process is A, ruled, and B, that it's also conducted as it should be. And now it's up to the sponsor to define whether there are additional things to be done, something like an ongoing surveillance. There's one GMP example. It's a new data integrity guide from the PICS, which explicitly speaks about this, about third-party management and extra controls. So if you feel that your data set is so important that you want to have additional controls, then it makes sense to also write into the contractual agreements that you have the availability, the possibility to see the data and to review it either on a regular basis or at an ad hoc basis in a audit-like situation. So this is doable, and this can be an important cornerstone, about it's called surveillance during the operation of the system.
To add to that, so of course there should be constant monitoring between parties for ensuring compliance during the trial, but also before the trial starts, when the contracts are made and when the systems are being set up in preparation for the trial, there should be an active participation of the sponsor to ensure that compliance is basically designed into the system, so that all the topics we refer to, like audit trails, security of the systems, access management, are in place, and also that there is a plan to review them continuously during the trial. And I think that we already talked about is in the previous webinar, and it's within the slides which are still available, a measure to ensure compliance with that and proper vendor management is to set up KPIs on critical areas of the trial. So regular reviews on topics which are very important for the outcome of the trial, and of course the safety of the participants.
Mm-hmm. So there's one additional question, maybe Talia. I think you had a brief go on this in the last case study. Maybe you can take that. Does a computerized system need to be validated twice if it is to be used in different trials for same purpose by a single sponsor?
So this is a tricky topic, and it was discussed during this conference that I attended. And the answer is that there should be critical thinking on that and a risk-based approach. So what does it mean, same purpose? Like, if there are two different trials, there should be some differentiation between those two trials, right? So if the data at slightest are different, if there is anything different within the case report forms, then at least these points which are different should be subject to revalidation. And of course, if somebody thinks that there is really no difference, this should be at least documented, that it was a risk-based decision based on and explain the rationale why this was not done. At least that would be the minimum requirement.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree to this point. Yes. With that, I think we do not have open questions at the moment. Therefore, I would like to thank you for your participation, for all the questions, of course. We are happy to get questions afterwards. So if you want to do so, reach out to us via LinkedIn, or most of you might also have our email address. So please reach out, and we are happy to help or to discuss. Thank you, Talia. Thank you, Milena. Thank you very much for the nice webinar. And thank you all the participants. And with that, I wish you a nice rest of the day. and hope to seeing you soon in one of our next webinars. Bye.
Thank you, Uri.
Bye.
Thank you, Talia. Ciao.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Bye.